Hannah lived a life of luxury and ease. She had everything she could ever want, from sparkling jewelry to her tiny dog, Buddy, who went everywhere with her. Even her nails looked like they had diamonds on them. One day she went shopping for fancy sunglasses with her future mother-in-law, Mrs. Johnson, a stern and traditional woman who never seemed impressed by Hannah. Mrs. Johnson tolerated Hannah only because she had heard that Hannah's father, Mr. Carter, was planning to gift a whole hospital as part of the wedding dowry. Despite her doubts about Hannah, Mrs. Johnson kept her concerns to herself, maintaining a composed exterior. But Hannah wasn't perfect. For all her wealth, she was terrible at math, something she often laughed about, brushing it off as a quirky flaw. On her wedding day, everything was planned to be flawless. The groom, Michael, Mrs. Johnson's son, was a reserved and responsible man who had grown up with the pressures of meeting his mother's high expectations. Although their relationship wasn't the most romantic, Michael was dedicated to making the marriage work, or so Hannah believed. Hannah's younger brother, Jake, was tasked with carrying her bouquet to the wedding hall. Jake, known for his clumsiness and carefree attitude, accidentally bumped into a food tray, sending the bouquet flying into the hands of Sam, a young part-time worker helping out at the event. Sam was a tall, quiet guy who often worked at events like this to support himself. He wasn't particularly thrilled about the job, but took pride in being reliable. Seeing Jake's panicked expression, Sam agreed to deliver the bouquet to Hannah's room. Although he wasn't keen on getting involved in the wedding chaos, he figured it was better than leaving the bride without her bouquet. When Sam entered Hannah's room, he stopped for a moment. Hannah was sitting in her wedding dress, looking beautiful but clearly annoyed. Without a word, she pinched her nose, motioning for him to stay back. She told him to leave the bouquet on a chair instead of giving it to her directly. Sam, unsure of what to make of her behavior, did as she asked, but couldn't help staring for a moment. Hannah, irritated, waved him off. Their silent clash turned tense, as neither seemed willing to back down. Then out of nowhere, Hannah swatted at Sam, hitting him in the face accidentally and making his nose bleed. Panicking, she moved to help him, but Sam pushed her away, accidentally brushing against her wedding dress and leaving a red bloodstain. Hannah gasped, her eyes filling with tears, but Sam quickly told her to calm down and not ruin her makeup. His tone was firm but gentle, as if he had dealt with dramatic situations before. Feeling guilty, Sam grabbed scissors and a sewing kit from the room. Carefully, he worked to clean and fix her dress. After some time, it looked almost new, and Hannah was ready to walk down the aisle again. But something wasn't right. Her father, Mr. Carter, the man who had built the family's wealth from the ground up, hadn't arrived yet. Mr. Carter was known for his generosity and ambition, but his workaholic lifestyle often kept him away from family events. Minutes later, someone rushed into the hall with terrible news. On the way to the wedding, Mr. Carter had received a phone call. His company had gone bankrupt, and the shock gave him a heart attack. He died on the spot. Hannah didn't know this yet, but Mrs. Johnson quickly did. Horrified by the news, she grabbed Michael and left the wedding hall, canceling the engagement without hesitation. The guests whispered in confusion, unsure of what to do. The whispers turned into a dull roar as people speculated about what had happened and why the groom's family had vanished. When Hannah finally found out, it felt like her world had crumbled. She had lost everything, her father, her family's wealth, and her marriage, on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. Alone and heartbroken, she had no one left but her dog and her car. Hannah left the wedding in tears, driving aimlessly. Her glamorous life was gone, and she didn't know what to do next. For the first time, she was truly on her own. Hannah sat in her car, parked on the side of a quiet road. The engine was off, and the silence wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. Her tiny dog, Buddy, sat beside her in the passenger seat, his head resting on her arm as if sensing her distress. Everything she had ever known, her father's support, her fiancé Michael, her future as Mrs. Johnson, was gone in a single day. Hannah wiped her face with the back of her hand and glanced at her phone. The last message she had received from anyone was from her mother, who was too heartbroken over her husband's death to even ask how Hannah was doing. Her mother, Mrs. Carter, had always relied on her husband's strength and decisions, and now she seemed adrift. That left Hannah truly alone, a thought that scared her more than she wanted to admit. Needing a roof over her head, Hannah drove to a real estate agency she had passed earlier. The agent, Mr. Baker, was polite at first, though he kept glancing at his watch as if she were wasting his time. Hannah explained she needed a small apartment and only had enough to pay up front for a year's rent. Mr. Baker grinned broadly as she handed over her last savings, money she had planned to use for her honeymoon. He reassured her that the studio apartment was in great condition and handed her the keys before rushing her out the door. The studio was cramped and far from glamorous, but it was a place to stay. Hannah unpacked the few belongings she had taken from her old home: a few clothes, Buddy's toys, and a framed picture of her father. She placed the photo on the bedside table and sat down, feeling a strange emptiness in the room. That night, she scrolled through her phone aimlessly until something caught her eye. It was a comment on an old social media post, one she had shared with her father when they were both deeply involved in piano music. The account name was Dodo Sol Sol Lala, a name tied to their shared love for music. The comment simply said, "How are you doing?" Hannah's heart skipped. Who was this? Could it be someone her father knew? Or perhaps someone who had been part of their piano world? Hannah's thoughts were interrupted the next morning by a knock at the door. Mr. Baker stood outside, claiming he needed to inspect something in the apartment. Although Hannah felt uneasy, she let him in. He wandered around for a few minutes before leaving with a quick goodbye. It wasn't until later that she realized something about his visit had felt strange. Later that day, Hannah went back to the real estate office to ask for clarification about the lease. Instead of answers, she found chaos. A crowd of angry tenants was gathered outside, yelling about being scammed. To her horror, Hannah learned that Mr. Baker had vanished with all the renters' money, including hers. The apartment wasn't even legally his to rent. In a flash, Hannah realized she was homeless. She and Buddy spent the night in her car. She bought cheap dog food for Buddy, but she couldn't bring herself to eat anything. As she sat in the driver's seat, staring at the empty streets, she noticed the comment from Dodo Sol Sol Lala again. Was it possible this person could help her? Maybe they knew something about her father or an inheritance. She clung to the thought like a lifeline. The account had recently posted a location. Desperate for answers, Hannah decided to drive there. It was several hours away, but she didn't care. She packed up Buddy and began the long drive, her heart racing with equal parts hope and fear. The journey didn't go smoothly. Buddy, unaccustomed to long car rides, became sick and vomited in the back seat. Distracted by trying to calm him down, Hannah didn't notice a bicyclist ahead until it was too late. She swerved, but her car clipped the bike, and she crashed into a nearby pole. The airbag deployed with a loud thud and everything went dark. When Hannah regained consciousness, she was lying in a hospital bed. Her head pounded, and her arms felt heavy. A nurse stood over her, checking her vitals, while Buddy's leash sat on the bedside table. "Your dog's okay," the nurse said, seeing Hannah's worried expression. "Someone took him to the pet hospital nearby." A moment later, Sam, the part-time worker from her disastrous wedding, walked in. He looked annoyed but also concerned. "Your dog's fine," he said curtly. "But you owe me for the bike." Hannah blinked, confused. "Bike?" she murmured. Then it hit her. Sam must have been the bicyclist she had hit. The doctor entered the room, cutting off their awkward exchange. He informed Hannah that while her injuries weren't life-threatening, the damage to her hands might affect her ability to play the piano. Hannah's chest tightened. The piano was the only thing she had left that connected her to her father. If she lost that too, she didn't know how she'd go on. Sam, who had been standing silently in the corner, seemed to soften. After the doctor left, he handed Hannah a bottle of water and said, "Don't cry too much. You'll mess up your face." His attempt at humor fell flat, but Hannah appreciated the effort. As the hospital bills began to pile up, Hannah realized she had no way to pay. Sam sighed, muttering about bad luck, and used his credit card to cover the costs, including Buddy's treatment. "You'll pay me back," he said firmly, though his tone lacked confidence. Hannah nodded, too overwhelmed to argue. For the next few days, Sam stuck around, helping Hannah with small tasks like adjusting her pillows or bringing her food. He grumbled about it constantly, but never actually left. Hannah, feeling both grateful and guilty, began to see a side of him she hadn't noticed before, a quiet kindness beneath his gruff exterior. One evening, as Sam was about to leave, he turned to Hannah and said, "You need a plan. You can't keep living like this." Hannah didn't have an answer. She stared at the floor, thinking about how much she had relied on others her whole life. For the first time, she realized she needed to figure out how to stand on her own, but she had no idea where to start. Hannah sat in the hospital bed, her hands wrapped in bandages, her mind racing. The doctor's words echoed in her head. Her hands might not fully recover, and playing the piano could be a challenge. The piano had been her lifelong passion, and the one thing that kept her connected to her father. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. Sam had stepped out briefly, but Hannah noticed he had left a small bag on the chair. Inside was a container of fresh fruit, a bottle of water, and a handwritten note. "Eat. You're useless if you're hungry." It wasn't exactly comforting, but it made her smile. Sam's rough edges hid a surprising amount of care. Later that afternoon, Sam returned carrying Buddy's leash in an envelope. "Your dog's okay. They said he just needs rest," he said, setting the leash down. Then he handed her the envelope. "This is your hospital bill. It's not pretty." Hannah's stomach dropped as she opened it. The amount was staggering, far more than she could pay. She had spent the last of her money on the scam rental, and now she was in even deeper trouble. Seeing the panic in her eyes, Sam sighed and pulled out his wallet. "I'll cover it for now," he said, "but you'd better figure out how to pay me back." Hannah nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't know why Sam was helping her so much, but she couldn't bring herself to ask. He seemed reluctant to explain his actions, and she didn't want to push him away. Over the next few days, Sam continued to visit, bringing small meals and checking on her progress. He wasn't warm or overly friendly, but his presence was oddly reassuring. Hannah began to open up to him about her struggles. She told him about her father, her failed wedding, and her uncertainty about the future. Sam listened quietly, occasionally offering a sarcastic comment that somehow made her feel better. On one visit, Sam brought up the mysterious comment from the account, "Dodo Sol Sol Lala." "You said it was connected to your dad, right?" he asked. "Maybe it's worth checking out." Hannah nodded. She had been thinking the same thing, but wasn't sure how to start. The account had recently posted a new message, this time sharing a location. It wasn't far, just a few towns over, and Hannah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this person could help her, or at least give her some answers about her father. When she was discharged from the hospital, Sam offered to drive her to the location. "It's not like I trust you to get there without crashing into something," he said with a smirk. Hannah rolled her eyes but agreed. She packed what little she had left, mostly clothes and Buddy's toys, and climbed into Sam's old car. The drive was uneventful until Buddy, still recovering from his earlier sickness, threw up in the back seat. Hannah scrambled to clean up the mess while Sam muttered about bad luck. Distracted by the commotion, neither of them noticed a pothole in the road. The car jolted violently, sending Hannah's bag flying and Buddy barking in alarm. "Can't you keep things under control for 5 minutes?" Sam said, pulling over to inspect the car. He shook his head, muttering under his breath as he checked the tires. Fortunately, they were fine, and they continued their journey. When they arrived at the location, Hannah's excitement quickly turned to confusion. It was a small rundown music store with a faded sign that read, Melody's Corner. Inside, an elderly man sat behind the counter tuning a piano. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting up with recognition. "You must be Hannah," he said, surprising her. "Your father used to come here all the time. He talked about you a lot." Hannah's heart raced. "Did he leave anything here? A message or something for me?" The man nodded and handed her a small, dusty box. Inside was a single piece of sheet music and a handwritten note. The note read, "For when you need to start over." It was signed with her father's initials. Tears streamed down Hannah's face as she held the paper. She didn't know what it meant, but it felt like her father was speaking to her from beyond the grave. As they left the store, Sam glanced at the sheet music. "So what's the plan?" he asked. "You gonna play this and magically fix everything?" Hannah gave him a small smile. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just a reminder that I need to figure out how to start over." Sam shrugged, but didn't argue. For the first time in weeks, Hannah felt a spark of hope. She didn't know what the future held, but she was determined to find out. Back at the hospital, Hannah unfolded the sheet music from her father's box and stared at it. The notes on the page were familiar, a simple melody she had learned as a child. Her father used to play it for her on lazy afternoons, his way of reminding her that no matter how chaotic life got, music could bring calm. Now it felt like a message, a push to keep moving forward. Sam was leaning against the doorframe, watching her. "You gonna play it?" he asked. Hannah shook her head. "I don't even know if I can," she said, glancing at her bandaged hands. The thought of not being able to play again made her chest tighten. "Then figure it out," Sam said bluntly. "Sitting around isn't going to fix anything." The next morning, Sam drove Hannah and Buddy to her temporary home, his small, modest apartment. "It's not the Ritz," he said as he unlocked the door, "but it's better than your car." Hannah was hesitant to accept his help, but had no other options. Sam's apartment was a stark contrast to the luxury she had grown up in. The furniture was old but functional, and the space was cramped, with only one bedroom. Sam had cleared a spot in the living room for her to sleep, setting up an air mattress and a few blankets. Buddy sniffed around curiously, eventually curling up on the couch. "He's settling in better than you," Sam said with a smirk. Hannah managed a weak laugh. I don't want to be a burden." "You already are," Sam said, though there was no bite in his tone. "But I'll survive." Over the next few days, Hannah started trying to piece her life back together. She spent hours staring at her father's note, trying to decipher its meaning. She played the melody on her phone, humming along softly, her bandaged hands resting in her lap. It wasn't the same as playing it herself, but it brought a small sense of peace. Sam continued to work his part-time jobs, leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. Hannah noticed how hard he worked and how little he seemed to spend on himself. One evening, she asked him why he was helping her so much. "You remind me of someone," he said after a long pause. "Someone who needed help but didn't get it in time." Hannah wanted to ask more, but the look on his face stopped her. It was the first time she had seen him vulnerable, and she didn't want to push him away. One afternoon, Hannah decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. She stumbled across a small community center with a sign advertising music lessons. An idea began to form in her mind. Maybe she couldn't play the piano like she used to, but she could teach. It would be a way to stay connected to music and earn a little money. She brought the idea to Sam that evening. "I think I want to start teaching piano," she said. "Do you think it's crazy?" Sam shrugged. "It's not crazy, but do you have a piano?" Hannah froze. She hadn't thought about that. Pianos were expensive, and she had no money to spare. "I'll figure something out," she said, though she wasn't sure how. The next day, Sam came home with a surprise. He had rented a small keyboard from a local music shop. "It's not a grand piano, but it's a start," he said, setting it up in the corner of the living room. Hannah stared at it, tears welling up in her eyes. "Why are you doing this for me?" she asked. Sam looked at her for a moment before shrugging. "Maybe I'm just tired of hearing you hum off key," he said, walking away before she could respond. Hannah sat down at the keyboard, her hands trembling as she placed them on the keys. She hesitated, then slowly began to play the melody from her father's sheet music. The notes were shaky, and her hands ached, but for the first time in weeks, she felt like herself again. A week later, Hannah put up a flyer at the community center advertising piano lessons. She didn't expect much, but to her surprise, she received a few calls within days. Her first student was a young boy named Liam, who wanted to learn to play for his school's talent show. Hannah's nerves melted away as she started teaching, and for a moment, she forgot about her troubles. Sam watched from the kitchen, pretending to read a newspaper. He didn't say anything, but the small smile on his face didn't go unnoticed. As Hannah began to rebuild her life, the mysterious account, Dodo Sol Sol Lala, posted another message. This time, it included a cryptic clue. "The answer is in the stars." Hannah showed the message to Sam, who frowned. "What does that mean?" she asked. Sam shook his head. "No idea. But I guess we're going stargazing." That evening, Hannah and Sam set out to decipher the cryptic message from Dodo Sol Sol Lala. Armed with nothing more than a flashlight and a printout of the clue, they drove to a hill on the outskirts of town, where the stars were brightest. Buddy happily hopped into the car with them, his tail wagging, as if he understood the importance of the trip. Hannah couldn't stop fidgeting. "Do you think this will actually lead to something? Or am I chasing a dead end?" Sam glanced at her while driving. "It's better than sitting around wondering. Besides, you've come this far. Might as well see it through." When they arrived, the hilltop was quiet and serene. The stars stretched endlessly across the sky, twinkling like they were trying to tell her something. Hannah spread out a blanket for Buddy to lie on while she and Sam stood nearby, staring up at the sky. "The answer is in the stars," Hannah murmured to herself, looking for any kind of pattern or clue. What could it mean? Sam tilted his head, pointing toward a group of stars. "Look at that one. Doesn't it look like a piano?" Hannah squinted. The constellation he was pointing to vaguely resembled the shape of piano keys. Her heart skipped a beat. Could this be it? But before she could say anything, Sam pulled out his phone and started searching for nearby landmarks associated with the constellation. After a few moments, he showed her the screen. "There's a music shop in town called Starlight Keys. It's a long shot, but it's worth checking out." The next day, Hannah and Sam visited Starlight Keys, a cozy little shop filled with instruments and sheet music. The owner, a cheerful man named Mr. Walker, greeted them warmly. "Can I help you find something?" he asked. Hannah hesitated before showing him the clue from Dodo Sol Sol Lala. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. Mr. Walker's face lit up. I've been waiting for someone to come asking about that." He disappeared into the back room, returning with a small locked box. "Your father left this here months ago. He said it was for you." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Her father had always been full of surprises, but she hadn't expected this. Mr. Walker handed her a key, and with trembling hands, she unlocked the box. Inside was a simple leather journal and a small ornate key. The journal was filled with her father's handwriting, detailing his plans and dreams for her. On the last page, he had written, "The key is to your future. Use it wisely." Hannah stared at the key, her mind racing. What does it open? She wondered aloud. Later that evening, Hannah and Sam pored over the journal, trying to piece together its meaning. Among the pages, they found a reference to an old family property, a small cottage her father had bought years ago but rarely mentioned. The journal said it was located just outside town, and the key was labeled with the same address. "Looks like we're going on another trip," Sam said with a smirk. Hannah smiled, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This time, she felt like she was finally getting closer to understanding her father's intentions. The cottage was tucked away in a quiet forest, surrounded by tall trees and wildflowers. It was small but charming, with a stone path leading to the front door. Hannah's heart swelled as she inserted the key and stepped inside. The interior was cozy and filled with her father's personal touches. Family photos, a grand piano in the corner, and shelves lined with music books. It was clear he had intended for this place to be a sanctuary for her, a place to rebuild and rediscover herself. Over the next few weeks, Hannah moved into the cottage and began teaching piano lessons from the cozy living room. Word spread quickly, and soon she had more students than she could handle. Each day she felt a little stronger, a little more like herself. Sam continued to be a constant presence, helping her settle in and fix up the cottage. Though he still grumbled about her being a walking disaster, his actions spoke louder than his words. Hannah couldn't help but feel grateful for him, even if he refused to admit how much he cared. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Hannah turned to Sam. "I don't know how I would have gotten through all this without you," she said softly. Sam shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "You're tougher than you think," he said. "You just needed a push." Hannah smiled, knowing he would never take credit for how much he had done for her. But deep down, she knew he had become more than just her unlikely savior. He was her friend, her partner in rebuilding, and maybe something more. For the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah felt hopeful. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, and she realized her father's message had been clear all along. The answer wasn't just in the stars. It was in finding the strength to start over, and that's exactly what she had done.